Well, hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, today, what I thought I'd do is just kind of talk about a simple formula for landscapes. And this would be a good paint along if you want to paint along. I'm going to be using this photo today to paint from. I mainly want just a simple sky, earth, water kind of a landscape. But first of all, what I want to do is just edit this real quick. So I'm going to choose edit to, I'm on my iPad, by the way. I want my horizon line down here, and I'm going to crop out a lot of that foreground. And I even think I'm going to, this little gap in the distant hills, I'm going to offset to that to the right a little bit. And it's easy to see how you would build light values to medium values to darker values. But now when I say a formula for constructing or layering up a landscape, let me show you real briefly what I'm talking about. Now this first one, and what I'm going to be teaching you today, a whole or a total layering approach. So basically you're like going along and you're going to paint probably sky, and you're probably going to graduate that. Then you're going to paint land or water, since that's the next lightest thing. There are exceptions to everything, but a lot of times you're going to leave a band. And all of this is very light in here, but it's going to get painted over with darker layers. So you're going light to dark, you know, and there may be some clouds up here. And then in here, you're going to usually have your landforms, whether it's mountains, whether that's little shards of land, hills, tree lines, that sort of thing. And you layer it up, leaving highlights where you can. And this may be water down here, or it might be land. As it dries, you go in and you add your deepest shadow values. Could be rocks, could be bank shadows if you're painting on the edge of water. And you're just layering it up, you know. And then if you decide to put trees, maybe this is a closer up scene. They're usually dark over light. And this is a good system or formula, if you will, to use to construct scenes. You need to analyze where your lightest values are, see what you can paint in total, and how you can build them up, and where you need to leave highlights. So learn that. That's important. The other form or format, and I use this a lot, is what I call tiling or piecemeal. And I usually start with middle values and I just paint in pieces. Now I determine whether something's going to go behind, like a sky. But I won't necessarily paint the whole thing. This is a valid approach also. It's kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Now you have to be careful with this approach, because where you need a lot of color, you may end up painting around stuff and then that doesn't look real natural. But you can, in a sense, you can add things piece by piece in a tile. These are both valid approaches, and both approaches that I would learn. We're going to be working on this one today, since I haven't demonstrated that a lot. A lot of the really good watercolorists out there use this approach. It's a great approach. It's a simple, quick approach. This approach over here is something that I think probably works better in more complex scenes. But in almost every case, you're going to use this approach over here somewhere. You're going to use a little bit of both, usually. So it helps to practice. I hope that's all making sense. The other thing you have to be careful with on this one is leaving unnatural hard edges. You know, where you want a distinct shape, you're going to leave a hard edge, but you want to make sure that everything is soft and blends out where it needs to. That's where this method shines. All right, let's take a closer look at our scene. The idea is to use layers that paint one on top of the other as much as possible, and to minimize the amount of painting around. This is a good scene for that kind of painting because you have minimal highlights. Your highlights are in the sky and in the water, which is going to be your first layer anyway. The next brightest highlights are along these banks. So when you're painting through and your first layer, you can cover that area, but you might want to leave some lighter areas. The distant hills are not going to matter because they're much darker. All the shadows are not going to matter because they're much darker. So how much lighter is this than the lightest part of the sky? Let's take a look. Isolate the value. So it is darker. So you can paint through there. But when you add this color, these colors, just keep in mind that you're going to darken things a little bit. So what I would do is graduate the sky, graduate the water, add some puffy clouds, maybe a few clouds to match in reflection, and leave a lighter band through the center. That simplifies my first layer. Then I can just add layers from distance to forward. Minimal painting around. You always look for those opportunities in any scene. You get a lot of areas that vary greatly. That's where tiling comes in handy. And sometimes tiling is just, it's easier to wrap your head around depending on the scene. Let's go ahead and get to my demo. All right, it's taped up, ready to go. I'm ready to paint. Now I have this at about a 20-degree angle maybe. If you're more of a beginner, you're probably better off painting flat, especially if you're not dealing or used to dealing with water running down. But if you're okay with that, go for it. All right, we're ready to go. Well, this is very, very, very sad. I started painting thinking I was recording, and I wasn't. Not a very good thing for a paint along.
Hey, wait for me!
Again, my apologies. What you can see though is my horizon's going to be right in here. Water areas that reflect the sky are going to be darker than the sky very soon. It's still quite damp. I used a wide, you can use any wide flat brush. I use this Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brush because I like the way it wets paper. Got it soaked, pretty much gave it 2 good coats, let it soak in. So I got a nice even sheen. I'm using a Princeton Neptune oval wash to pat in my color. I started out by using a light graded wash here, ultramarine and Payne's gray, a little cerulean. Same gradation down here. It's a fairly streaky gradation, and I left a bright spot through here. Then while it's still wet, I just patted in some darker colors to spread that looked like clouds. Not doing a lot with the clouds. They're bigger up here, smaller here, because I've got a cloud situation going off into the distance. Okay? That's what I missed on video. So sorry. But now we're to the point where this needs to dry completely. It's a good idea sometimes to very, very lightly, before you start laying in those land washes, get a very light line for your horizon. And I mean really light. And I'm going to start with a sort of a blue-green distant hill. I'm only using the reference as a guide. So I've got kind of a dirty blue-green. And I'm just going to start putting in these landforms. I'm not following the reference per se. I'm just going to kind of do my own shape.
What's happening out there?
Shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
You can come in here with a squeezed out brush. I like flats for putting in these forms because you can just kind of chisel them in, I think. Moving down, I'm going to keep the wash light using some red iron oxide, a little bit of nickel quinacridone gold. And by the way, this landform here does not have to be as dark as you're going to get it. You can go back over it with another wash later on and add some deeps. You get to these edges that are along the water, those are going to be shadowy, and you can start that, while it's wet. Make these shapes, nice and even with the plane of the water. What you do on top, you can vary, but get them nice and even on the water plane. Get some nice variegated washes going in there. Got several nice inky washes that I'm dipping into different ways. Again, if you haven't seen that video on water control mistakes, I talk about bold mixtures, not being timid with your paint. Now I'm going to go back here and pick up this shape that I missed. Really should have done that first. And they just have in the reference a bit of a bluff, but I'm going to add A little more feature. And you're almost on the same plane, so it's not that much farther away. Add in some dark, and if you're on an incline, that will sink to the bottom a little bit. But just like anybody, I get lazy about making things dry or letting them dry. I get anxious. I just want to keep painting. Those are common mistakes. When you know something needs to dry, or you know you need to change the level of water in your brush. And while this is damp, just going to hit some of these water lines with darker pigment.
Please move.
Come back with a dry brush you can pick up, or you can add clear water, push some of that pigment back, and then pick it up. You want to create an edge. It's going to put in a light shape here. Now I'm going to raise this a bit because we're getting some glare. Now this has partial dry paper and partial wet paper. None of it's bone dry, but I actually like what that's going to do to the paint. So that'll create some edges and create some soft blends. And all I'm doing is touching with the edge of the brush. And that's one of the reasons I like, aside from being able to lay in these straight water horizontal landforms, I like the flat for being able to just pat in the water line, the deep tones on the water line. All right, while those are drying, I'm going to come back in here, just stroke in some darker color. These will make shadow forms back here. Give a little more character to those hills. And of course, the further forward you come, the more detail and contrast you will see. I want to get some highlight here, so I'm going to add a little bit of clear water. I'm going to pat it in just as if it were paint. And squeeze my brush, rapidly changing the moisture in the brush. And come back here and lift. That'll give me a little bit of an edge here. Maybe kind of make it a little more organic by patting tissue on it. We're not finished yet, but that sort of sums up the layering process that you can use a lot in landscape. You can use it in conjunction with the sort of tiling piecemeal approach. Now we're going to go in and put some shadows and maybe a few little details. All right, I've dried these. So now I want to put in some reflections for these little landforms here. You won't see a lot, but I'm going to do a little bit. And I really want to darken some of these shorelines here at the very bottom, but I'm going to wait till I've got the reflections in. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You can pre-wet, but I find that a bit meticulous because you have to kind of go around here and remember where you pre-wet. You got to make sure not to loosen up that paint too much. I'd much rather actually paint the reflection and then soften the lower edge. So both work. But in this case, I'm going to do a section at a time, and I'm only going to do a little bit. We'll see how it works. It's going to reflect this color somewhat, but it's going to be more the color of the water. At least it is in my reference. So let's do this much. And I'm going to leave some of this light area as a highlight. I immediately wash out my brush, come back with some water. and blur out that edge, blend out that edge. I think that works. And you can come back here and pat some dark and it will run down. Once again, just patting in a little paint, patting in a little water underneath that to soften it, that edge. I've just got a grayer, greener mixture of what's going on up here. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to pat in a couple water lines back here, not really reflections. And right here pretty much is the only place we're going to see much reflection. Some water, add some water to that edge. And again, I'm going to have fun with a few of these little water lines while I have this color going. All right, I think that's good. Just some good soft reflection there. All right, I am going to go back and make some of my final shoreline values here, which are going to be dark. Now, you don't want to just go and outline the shore. You want to do this selectively, organically, pat it, sort of, even patchily, I would add. And I didn't make those reflections as dark as they were in the reference, which is fine. I'm trying to control the contrast a little more, but I want to get some decent dark pop to these shoreline shapes. In some places it can be very dark. I would mix my darks though. I wouldn't use a black. Sometimes that just looks dead flat and like a hole in your paper. Could do this with a fine brush. I'm just continuing to use this big flat. A big flat like this is great, especially if you're afraid you're going to delve into detail uncontrollably. This forces you to stay out of that and focus on the values of the landforms, the major shapes. And if you have to put a little detail in there, just use the corner. Now in the reference there's some fence posts. I like that. I'm going to use that. Those are going to be very dark. So we're going to take some Payne's Gray and red iron oxide. One way you can make a base for something is just to rub the bottom of it like this. We can come back later and just kind of put in a little wash to make it look rooted in the ground. I'm going to make these a little bit more leaning here and there just to make them interesting. It's nice to also have them kind of break the plane of that land shape there. Let's make some small ones over here. I like how there's like a cluster of them over here, like you're looking down the row of them. And from this point on, I mean, that you can stop anywhere. From this point on, it's just, do you want to add more detail or do you want to leave it be? You know, you could add a little tree shape, a little stand of trees over here, different things like that. All right, not the nice clean white edge I was hoping for, but that is essentially the simple formula for a layered up landscape, layered from light to dark. As I've mentioned, that can be used with the tile technique. And if you want to see a better example of tile technique, I will link to one in particular down below, and you can compare the difference. All right, I hope that paint through was helpful. Thanks for watching. Thanks, patrons, for your support. And for minders everywhere, just a reminder, this channel is supported and sponsored by viewers just like you. By joining your fellow minders over on Patreon, you'd be taking a tangible role in supporting the YouTube art content and all the time and effort that goes into making it. Not to mention, you have access to some exclusive rewards, 24-hour early access to my videos, priority attention from me given to comments, questions, and requests, and this is over any other form of contact. Private messaging, which receives that same high priority attention from me. A Patreon community board where you can post artwork, comment on other patrons' art posts. Plus, over 150 other exclusive posts, which include reference photos and line art, or video series like Sketchbook Peeks, Studio Tips, Video Extras, and the 15-Minute Artist. And if one-time tips or donations are more to your liking, just hit the thanks heart below any video, or go to paypal.me/mindofwatercolor. Thank you so much for considering support of this channel. It means the world. And we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.